So first panel, and we're already getting into it. A lot of emotional, the phrase that keeps coming up for me is emotional labor, and how much, I've been talking to these three women the last few days and how much they're putting into this, how much Claire is putting into this, how much I know all of you are putting into this. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about all of this with you. And I was thinking that maybe we could start with Kelsey. As you might have heard, she became an activist at age 10. You were saying you were a born activist. And can you talk a little bit about, as a 10-year-old, how do you see what's going on in the world and with climate change and, the climate crisis, and think I'm going to do something outward to make a difference?
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah. This morning, actually, at breakfast, we were talking a little bit about what does the future look like for all of us? I'm not in this industry by any means. In fact, I don't aspire to be in any industry. I want to be a teacher. But doesn't matter your career, where you are, what you want to do, we all are going to be called to make, as Claire mentioned earlier, sacrifices. And at age 10, I understood that was going to be my reality. As an aspiring teacher, even then, my father is a professor and my grandpa was as well. I was looking ahead at, what are my students' lives going to be like? What are my children's lives going to be like? My mother was a social worker and worked as a school administrator. So always I've thought about children and the future. And even then, and to this day, all of us, I know that's a big why Julia was compelled as well. And Gabriela, we were talking about your children. We are needing to understand this idea of personal sacrifice, but also that it is far beyond the personal choices, and we need to be calling on much higher powers to take this matter seriously. But certainly from the young perspective, from the youth perspective, this has and will continue to plague the realities of young children, this existential threat of climate change throughout our lives, which is why it's very important and an honor to be on this stage.
So you've been working on this for 13 years.
You don't have to remind me.
So what did that mean in the beginning? What did it mean to be an activist going up against, and how did it turn into suing the U.S. government?
What it meant to be an activist, and I think it does for anyone who wants to call themselves that, is acting on a vision. There's no image or there's no prescription to sign up to be an activist. You are one when you decide to uphold your values with conviction and work for a greater good, work for a greater vision. And at the time, it was being concerned about my natural environment. I'm named after wilderness areas in my home state of Oregon, in the bioregion of Cascadia, my first middle name. And that was always a concern. What does my surrounding look like? And it wasn't until 2011 where I learned of the work of Our Children's Trust. At the time, a local nonprofit. Now it's global impact. That I really felt that I could use something to amplify this voice and call on other forces of power to hold themselves accountable. Why should 10-year-olds be feeling like the weight of the world is on their shoulders and be worried about if they should pursue their own social activities or if they should opt out because that might be impacting the future state of the world in terms of climate destabilization. And so this opportunity I learned from a peer that even young people can make an impact in front of government, and they can do so through the branch of justice in the United States, and that's the judicial branch, and we can enforce action from branches of government who would normally never listen to the voices of children because we can't lobby them, we can't give them resources, and we can't vote, and we can do so through the branch of justice.
Julia, you founded Our Children's Trust in 2010. Can you talk a little bit about exactly what you do and why you do it?
I can. So I'm a lawyer, and I was working as a public interest environmental lawyer for a long time. And then I became a mom and started really digging into climate science, and it was frightening. And I saw this void in the legal community in terms of the work we were doing to try to solve the crisis. And what I came to through a path of a lot of conversations was we needed to be lifting up the voices and rights of young people who have the most at stake in this crisis. And they can't vote, but they can sue. And they have rights under constitutions and human rights laws and the public trust doctrine. And so we planned a coordinated effort to represent young people in suing their governments based on these foundational human rights laws that exist across the world, and to require them to act in ways that are consistent with those fundamental rights. And the basic premise of these cases is that governments, particularly like the United States government, are perpetuating a fossil fuel energy system that is destroying the planet. This is not just something that happens through private industry. This is actually government-controlled, supported, organized, and facilitated. And so we're asking the courts to find that governments are violating the fundamental constitutional rights of Kelsey and her plaintiffs, and to require governments to actually prepare plans for transitioning energy systems off of fossil fuels, and plans to protect soil resources for greater sequestration capacity. So without plans, like there's no plan in the United States to decarbonize. And currently 80% of our energy is fossil fuels. And it's only expected to continue on that path. And so that's basically what we're doing. And one thing that people don't understand is how long governments have known about this problem. So we were ready to go to trial about a year ago. We had all our evidence prepared. And I have US government evidence going back to the 1950s that they knew everything they needed to know about climate change and the impact it would have on all of us in the 1950s. Solid evidence, and they were predicting with accuracy sea level rise, temperature increases, and it wasn't just the US government, the UK knew as well. And one of the principles that I'll just touch on briefly about these cases is the public trust doctrine. And we actually in the United States get the public trust doctrine from England. And it comes from Roman law. And it's this really basic concept of law that everyone can understand. And it's that governments are trustees for the benefit of the people. They hold natural resources in trust for all of us and for all future generations. So your air, your water, your seas, the shores of the sea, these are all things that governments are required to protect, not just for today, but for all generations to come. And that law is rooted in constitutions and human rights laws around the country, and so it's a real basis of a lot of our cases.
In the US, you have a federal case, but you also have a lot of state cases. In the federal case, from my understanding when you first presented it, the lawyers on the government side, they don't disagree with your science, but it's more of a constitutional thing, correct? They are arguing that it is not their responsibility to regulate this or deal with this.
That's right. So the US government is arguing that Kelsey does not have a constitutional right to life, liberty, and property in the face of the climate crisis, that the government has no obligation, and that if Kelsey and her plaintiffs want the US government to do something different and not destroy the planet, they need to elect people who will take action in that way. And this is not a political issue. I mean, this is a life or death issue, as you just heard. And these young people have rights, right? So we have one of our liberty rights in the US is our right to be free from endangerment by government, to have our personal security protected. And if you think about that, government is saying to fossil fuel companies, here, have some subsidies, extract fossil fuels from our public lands. We're going to permit all the infrastructure necessary for you to promote and sell your product. At a time when we don't need that product anymore. That is an old way of producing energy. It's a dirty way, and it's destroying the planet. Fortunately, technologically, we have all the solutions we need. Wind and solar are cheaper. Our experts say we can transition, by mid-century, we can be off of fossil fuels globally. That's what's feasible. And what we're lacking is political will, but this is not a political issue. This is a life or death issue. So that's why we're going to the courts, and we're trying to protect the fundamental human rights of young people so that all political branches of government have to operate under that system.
One other question for you specifically. Why is it important for children to be leading this? For Kelsey, you're an adult now, but why it's 11 to 23, right? So why is that important? Why isn't it 11 to 90 in the lawsuit?
So when you're a lawyer and you're bringing a case, particularly a constitutional case, you want your plaintiffs to be those who are the most injured by the action, the conduct that you're challenging. And you have to bring evidence in to show that they're harmed. So we have medical experts and psychiatrists. And so I'll just talk about the health consequences for a minute. So children are different physiologically, right? They're still growing and developing, and they're affected more profoundly by heat and air pollution, increases in asthma and allergies, and dangers to their homes. So their security is most at risk, and they will live on the planet far longer than most of us in this room. And so they have really profound harms. And the mental health implications of climate change on young people, I think, is one of the most devastating things that is happening. I mean, to live in a world where you know that you may not survive and that you can't have children potentially. A lot of young people face really significant mental health impacts.
Hi, Gabby.
Hi.
How did you find out about Our Children's Trust and get involved in this?
It was actually a year ago. I read an article in The Guardian, and I was very compelled to find out more and decided to give my kids a donation in their name for Christmas. They were not as thrilled as a toy, but I thought this was the best gift possible. And I started to talk to. My first conversation was with Lou Helmuth, and deputy director, and I immediately, from a gut feeling to a brain instinct and understanding, this was an organization to support because they have a real chance, because it's a conservative-led case. This is a case that we have a conservative court, and this case is formulated that way. They have, as Julia was saying, irrefutable proof that the United States government knew for over 50 years that polluting the atmosphere, acidifying the oceans, and warming the oceans. They knew all these facts. And for 50 years, I mean, that's both administrations. And the case was started through the Obama administration. And I think that, and also speaking with Lou, it became very, very clear that this, of course, is a movement. It's not a trend. And this is a movement. And all movements in the United States have solidified by a constitutional change. From women's rights, civil rights, gay marriage, it has to have a constitutional change. So, the opportunity to support them it's a really a privilege.
Well, fashion in particular is not a very regulated business government-wise.
Yeah.
We were talking about this last night, a little bit more in Europe, but not in the U.S. and certainly not where a lot of the clothes are actually being produced. What do you think it's going to take to get this through and make it happen?
With the case specifically?
Yes, or any further regulation.
So one thing about working on climate change and energy is if you can solve the energy problem we have right now, which is really, this is an energy problem.
Yeah.
And if you can solve that, you can affect positive change in so many industries across the board, because burning fossil fuels is a very water-intensive industry. It's just such a hugely polluting industry, and so the transformation we can have by creating a decarbonized society and localized energy production and empowering communities, I think will have ramifications through every other industry, including the fashion industry. And what we need is, we need to win in court. And so just to give you context, some people ask me, can you really win this case? Or is this a publicity stunt? And we can win the case. We have solid grounding in law. And we've won 3 big motions in our district court, which is our trial court. We've won 4 times in the Court of Appeals, and we've won twice in the US Supreme Court so far, all in the pre-trial motions. So right now we're waiting for another big decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, our intermediary court, hopefully to get the green light to go to trial. And when we get to trial, it's all about the evidence, and our evidence is rock solid.
Gabby, why is this all so important to you? You've made yourself very vulnerable. You are the whole industry's eyes are on you. You make your interest and concern about this topic a big part of your brand. What is driving that for you?
Well, it was one of the fundamental aspects of building our brand. All eyes of the industry seems like a lot of eyes on me.
Well, my eyes are on you.
Okay, so let's just focus on yours. I founded Gabriela Hearst. I used to have a contemporary brand called Candela, so it was a contemporary price point, and we were forced to do lower quality to meet the demands of the department stores. And Gabriela Hearst was the opposite of that. It was created after I inherited the ranch from my father in Uruguay, which is what my family's been doing for 7th generation, with long-term view and sustainability as the eye on build this. But there's nothing more pressing, as we've seen, to communicate. And I've been, at the beginning, I was talked out of the people were trying to tell me, you're in the luxury, you shouldn't be exposing yourself. But I am grounded on where my values stand and what I want to do. And for sure, I'm a flawed human, like we all are, but I think that sometimes this idea of I'm probably bigger companies than me are a much more risk, because this idea of trying to do something perfect so you're not exposed to be criticized can actually retract you from taking action. And I think that we should do the first steps. I always describe it as a practice, as when you start yoga, you start slow as your first things that you can achieve, and then when you get a little bit more confident, you go for your next goal and your next goal and your next goal. And it's very important to have real access to science and to talk to check with scientists, because there's it can get confusing at times. So it's important to check your facts.
Kelsey, I have one more question for you. Everyone in this audience is overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. Some of them have done a lot, some of them have done very little, but they don't know what will have the most impact. They do have to pay their employees and give them raises and all of this stuff. It is driven, right now the industry is driven by growth. If there was one thing, and it's not about fashion, it's about just being a good person or a person who wants change. I don't want to say good or bad. It's probably not appropriate. But what would you say to them? What should they do? What's the first change that they should make in their business, in their personal life?
Okay. All right. Closing comments. Just take it away. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think you can all do whatever you I am 23 years old. For more than half of my life, I've been concerned with whether or not I will have a future, with whether or not my children can exist. Not if they should, not if they could, if they will have something to exist on and in. I want you to continue on thinking about that sense of urgency. Continue on thinking about how can you make the greatest impact by still doing what you love, because we all need to be rooted in love. All of us are on this stage because of a deep sense of love. Not anger and fear, we have to move past those. We can confront them, but then come back to love. Continue to do what you love. continue to exist in love, but do so with fierce urgency and fierce action. In terms of this case, how can you support this case? Like Julia, like Gabby have supported young people through this work. We are actually calling on all types of individuals from different industries and different occupations to help stand with this case and stand with young people by filing what's called amicus curiae briefs. They're friends of the court's briefs, and we've seen incredible support from professors, scientists, sociologists, people of faith. We have tens of thousands of young people come together and file a amicus brief in support of the youth movement. And so you, as fashion industry figures, you could also join us and stand with us. I mean, we're asking everyone to transform our way of living and also our way of operating in different industries and agencies. And this is one way that you can stand ahead in leadership and say, we're going to support these individuals. We're going to support accountability in front of government with impending climate destabilization. So consider filing an amicus brief. Obviously, you might want to talk to us about that, but that's backstage.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.